Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Brandon Cobb. Today, we have Trevor on the show. In 2017, Trevor created Podcasting You in response to the necessity for outstanding real estate investors to have the opportunity to spread their narrative on high ranking podcasts. I'm excited about to talk to him today about that specific thing because that's been it's been pain. It's been the Achilles heel of a lot of people who go on shows. So far, Podcasting You has worked with 400 plus real estate professionals and booked over 6,500 interviews. Trevor is also committed in a triple net deal, multifamily and self storage development deal, in addition to investing in mortgage notes. And he's continuing enlarging his real estate portfolio. So he is a limited partner. I'm excited to talk to him a little bit today on some of the red flags that he sees in the real estate space when he's going out and investing. These are the red flags that you're going to want to pay attention to. Trevor, welcome to the show, man. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. Super excited to chat today and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun because I'm probably your target avatar. So we raise a lot of money from credit investors, non-accredited investors, friends and family for real estate deals. Like I was telling you, we primarily focus on first-time home buyer single family housing here in Middle Tennessee. We're developers. We work with the city. And so I'm excited to kind of dive into today, like who you help, how you help, or the whole raising capital thing and using podcasts as a medium to raise capital. But before we do that, we were getting into your background a little bit before we hit the go button. Tell the audience a little bit about you and your story.
Yeah, most certainly. Like you mentioned, I started podcasting you in 2017, but before that, in 2015, I actually started my own podcast and I was running a different company at that time. And I just thought it'd be cool to go out there and just to start my own podcast. And I was just interviewing very successful guests, whether they were in real estate, whether they were entrepreneurs, whether they were business professionals. Like some of the investors and entrepreneurs that I had interviewed was like David Osborne. He's a very successful investor and owns like a ton of Keller Williams franchises. That's always a good franchise to own when you can own multiple offices. I interviewed like Jay Papasan. He's the co-author of like The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. I think he has a couple other books out there. And I was just talking to these different individuals, and that got me started into the podcasting space. Ran that for about 2 years of doing that show, and with that particular company, just wasn't making a lot of money at the time, and I was almost burning the candle at both ends, just doing a ton of work, just grinding. I was still in college at the time, but anytime I had free, I was just working on the company. And after about 2 years of running a company, and you haven't made a ton of money on it, I was like, okay, I want to start making money now. I've built up these skills, so I started just freelancing what I had learned. So when I had started my podcast, I was bootstrapping it. So I was editing the shows, I was booking the guests, I was pretty much doing everything, the social media content from it. So I took those skills that I had and started freelancing and was just finding individuals they needed my skills in 2017. And I came across a turnkey investor out of LA, and she wanted to go out and she wanted to get booked on podcasts. And I thought to myself, well, I've booked a lot of guests on my show. How hard could that be to book her on podcasts? So started working with her, and then honestly just started picking up more freelance clients. About a year into it, had to hire that first employee because I was like, if I want to scale the company, I can't be doing it on my own. And then it just continued to grow from there. Early on, I was working in all the different niches. I was working with like real estate investors, business owners. We were working with lawyers, politicians, health coaches. And after about a year or two of doing that, I was like, I am spreading myself way too thin here because there's so many podcasts out there. But every time I work in a new niche, I would have to go and break into that specific area of podcast. So if I was working with like a health coach, now I got to break into the health coach podcast. If I'm working with an investor, I got to break into the investor niche. So after pulling my hair out for about 2 years of doing that, I'm like, I want to niche down. Who do I like working with the most? And it just happened to be real estate investors. And it's been a good journey. And I look back now, I'm like, I wanted to niche down to real estate. And then obviously niching down into real estate, I realized there are a ton of niches within real estate. You have your standard, your multifamily guys, your self-storage, your
Yeah.
mobile home park, like you mentioned yourself, Brennan, your developers. And then you can even go like your mortgage note folks. And then you have your CPAs, attorneys, your cost seg people, your 1031 people, your even your whole life insurance folks that do the infinite banking and that sort of thing. So that's really our specialty. Outside of that, we've grown it a little bit in the last year or so, working with folks in the oil and gas space. A guy that teaches you how to invest in laundromats. I think the coolest one we worked with was a company where you can invest in barrels of whiskey. and it's like $1 million investment with them. It's like the next level up from like the 506c deals. It's pretty crazy. I mean, you're talking really ultra high net worth investors when you're talking $1 million to invest, not just in a multifamily deal, but these barrels of whiskey, which are obviously going to be a little bit more volatile than the multifamily space. But yeah, it's been good. It's been a wild ride. I think now we're up to 7 or 8 team members. I never expected to start a PR company. That's what we could be considered. It just happened to be the company that made money. And I'd started 4 different companies prior. So it's been a good ride. And yeah, that's our primary specialty is working with folks, either investors or folks in the alternative investment space, to go out there and help them either like raise capital, build brand awareness through the power of podcasting.
Well, what I love about you is that you are an investor too. So you're invested in some deals, some multifamily deals, triple net deals, self storage development, and notes. So you are the
Mhm.
avatar that you are trying to help your clients get. And so that's really insightful because you know how you think and how you're
Mhm.
looking at deals. And I want to talk about that a little bit later, how you're able to pinpoint red flags when deciding kind of what deals to jump into. But for this medium, it is changing a lot, right?
Mhm.
The eyeballs don't go away. All the old television, radio, newspapers, they're just transitioning. And your newer generations are no longer watching TV, Fox
Mhm.
News. They're watching Google News. They're watching YouTube. They're no longer listening to the radio. Maybe they are when they're driving their car, but at home, I highly doubt it. They are listening to podcasts. And all the newspapers have moved online. People are going to websites now. What are you noticing since I think you said you started in 2017? Here's what I'm looking at. How has the PR space changed in general?
Yeah, I'd say there's just been a huge gravitation towards podcasts specifically. I would say this really started back in 2020, where we had enough clients in 2017, 18, and 19. But I found when COVID happened, and all of a sudden you had all these real estate events, you had your conferences, all of a sudden they're on the back burner. No one knows what's going on with COVID, how bad it is or how contagious it is. Like everyone else back in March of 2020, we just had no idea what we didn't know. So looking out for the year, all the real estate conferences had just shut down. We're not going to do it. We don't know what's going on. Again, we don't know what we don't know. So because of that, I found that a lot of our real estate clients that had done speaking engagements, they had never done podcast interviews before. But
Yeah.
now all of a sudden they want to go out and they want to share their story. They want to build brand awareness. They want to raise capital where previously they could be doing it from stages, where now all of a sudden they're forced to be doing it, which is good for our company being forced to doing it from their house. And I had found that because of that, there's just been a huge influx of people wanting to go out there and go on podcasts, because I think it was that mindset. They were almost like timid. They weren't sure. And that's like anything, like whether you're starting your podcast or whether you're being a guest on your podcast, there's that level of uncomfortableness because you don't know what to expect, especially if you've never been a first time guest. But now when you're pushed into it and you have to go out there and be a guest on podcasts to grow your company and to grow your brand, I think that really skyrocketed the industry. I think now there's been a ton of podcasts that are being created. I think people find the value in it of either, being a guest or starting their own podcast, just from the sense of building that credibility, building that awareness, where I could go say Brandon to like your website. I can go like, oh, like these are the podcast Brandon's been on. Oh, these are Brandon has his own podcast. It's going to be more credible because you could think about it on your website. You have your bio and maybe it's a paragraph or two going over your experience. But when someone can listen to like a 30-minute podcast episode with you, that allows you to go a lot more in
Mm,
depth than you just, again, having that bio on your website. So I would say just within the PR space, in the podcasting space, it just really just took off. But again, because of that, I think the good podcasts are here to stay, and there's much more competition now. And to have like a good quality show, I mean, there's just simple, basic things like be consistent with your podcast. Make sure if you're going to be releasing episodes, you release them on a consistent basis. You don't want to release an episode today, then release one 3 weeks from now, then a month from now, then 2 weeks. It's going to be hard to build that connection with your audience, have like good quality microphones, and then just be in it for the long term. I mean, the number one reason people either give up being a guest or being a host is they expect to see results right away. And I'm sure, Brandon, as you know, it's definitely not that easy being a podcast host, and even being a guest, it takes work as well. And it could be, 6 months before you start seeing results. It could be 12 months before you start seeing results. But then it's building up like that residual factor where all of a sudden you're producing your podcast and you have episodes going out all the time, or you're going on shows and having your interviews go out all the time, and then you're getting in all that traffic and all those leads coming from there. So long story short, I would say it just really has taken off since 2017, and it's been crazy how many people are starting a podcast and are okay with starting a podcast, because it's almost like if you back in 2017, it was like if you had a podcast, like you were a strange person. Like, why would you start a podcast? Where now it's almost like you're a strange person if you don't have a podcast. So it's the
Eh,
narrative has definitely flipped a lot in the last 7 years or so.
yeah, it establishes yourself as an authority figure. It allows
Mhm.
people to get to know who you are. And because there's two things that you're talking about. There's two dynamics. Dynamic number one is your own show. And dynamic two is going on other people's show, which podcast you is, it sounds like what you're really great at, right?
Mhm.
You're great at marrying up real estate, uh, people who are raising capital for real estate deals with their target audience to be able to raise that capital and be able to finance and syndicate those deals. And I would argue that you could replace the word real estate investor with just about anybody who's out there raising capital, right? You
Mhm.
just niched down into that space and made it a little bit more tailored. But the methods work for anybody who's listening to this and want to start using the podcast medium to go and raise capital. What are you seeing successful real estate entrepreneurs who are raising buttloads of capital doing that the ones are not doing when they're doing these podcast shows?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the first off is some of our clients previously, they were just going to any real estate show that's out there. And there's a ton of real estate shows in the space, but some of them might not make sense for what you're looking to do if you're raising capital. So if you're talking to a general real estate show where it's newer investors, those investors probably aren't going to be able to invest with you because they just want to go out and want to do it on their own. Where I find the ones that have success, they have that targeted game plan. And you can think to yourself, okay, who's investing in my deals? So let's just make it simple. You have a 506c deal. You're going to have your accredited investors. Okay, let's work that back. Who's the accredited investors? High income individuals, so doctors, lawyers, dentists, medical sales professionals. Even if it's a 506b deal where it's non accredited, I mean, typical minimums 25, 50, 100K. Someone that is just starting off is probably not even going to have 25K get into a deal if that's typically what I see on the lower end of a minimum, with usually 50K being somewhere in the middle, and just targeting those podcasts where those individuals are going to be listening to, and just doing that due diligence where there are a ton of real estate podcasts, there's a ton of podcasts out there, and you just got to look for them and just use different tools that are out there to find those shows that are talking to that specific audience, where again, you don't want to be spending an hour of your time talking to an audience if it's just folks that are looking to really get started investing in real estate. Where if you're a real estate coach, yeah, it makes more sense to go on those general real estate shows because those are folks that need the coaching, that are going to need the help. So I find that people or clients or individuals in the real estate space just spend time going on the wrong shows. So it's making sure you're spending your time going on the right shows. And then it's also even like, I don't even know why they get accepted, but you'll see like a multifamily guy on like a fix and flip show, or a fix and flip guy on a multifamily show where, 9 out of 10 guests are multifamily. So that's not like really your audience unless you're going in and like, I mean, fix and flip, I mean, you can maybe consider value add to multifamily, but depending on how quickly you turned around. So just making sure you stay within your audience. And then after that, just having like a lead capture system. So do you have like a website set up? Do you have like your email automation set up? I mean, because at the end of the day, like even when I go on podcasts, there's a number of times where people go to our website and they'll just download our ebook. They're not going to book a call with me, even though they hear me on a podcast. They like what I have to say. They still don't know enough about me, and I haven't built that relationship of trust with them yet. So you want to have like a lead capture system set up. So you want to have like a nice professional ebook. And honestly, what I did for like our website is I went back through like in 2023. These are the top 15 blog articles on our website. I could just use Google Analytics, see the top 15 articles, took all those articles and hired someone on Upwork for like $300 and was like, hey, put together an ebook based on all these blogs. And then she organized it nice. She made it, nice graphics. So I got a nice professional ebook because I know that people are interested in these articles because I could just see that they were clicking on them. And then I have an ebook. I have that ebook set up, and then you want to have like the email automation set up so people can download it. So like we use Active Campaign, just have a basically like a 7-day sequence. So like someone downloads it, then every single day they're going to get a drip email talking about the
Yep.
power of podcasting, benefits of being a podcast guest, and then maybe day 6 or 7 we'll say, hey, if you want to be a guest on podcast, book a call with our company. So you can do things like that. You can have your retargeting software set up through Google Ads. So now someone's come onto your site and then you retarget and follow them all across the internet. And then yeah, there's just a lot that you can do. And I find that the ones that are successful, like, yeah, they use podcasts to drive traffic, but then they have a way to capture that traffic even if someone doesn't book a call with them, because maybe they heard you on an interview, they sign up for your email list, or maybe they check out your website and then they forget about you, but then you want to re-market to them. So it's like podcasting is like one part of the marketing strategy where you want to have all these other parts in place just to make sure you're capturing the attention. Because I know for me, I might go on an interview and maybe one person books a call with me, but I could see from that interview 10 people signed up for my email list. Well, after about 2 or 3 months, maybe 20 or 30% of those people, so 2 or 3 people from the email list, book a call with me just because I've been sending out helpful content to them. I haven't been trying to be too salesy. I mean, obviously, I want them to book a call, but I want to provide valuable information. And then you could think of the individual that maybe they have a website, but there's nowhere to track it, where someone comes to their website and there's nothing there, and then they just leave, and then that's the end of it. So that's really the big differences, is targeting the right shows and then making sure you have all those systems and processes set up on the back end to basically capture everything. And I mean, it sounds like it's a ton of work, but I mean, if you implement it over the course of a few months of getting that ebook written, even if you don't have blogs, I mean, you could probably hire someone to just go ghost write like 8 benefits of passive investing, or how to generate 10K a month in passive investing, just something simple like that added to your website. And then you get those other tools added for like our email pop-ups. Last thing I want to mention is we use Opt-in Monster, and that's been phenomenal for us. And you can do tons of different things like that. You can target people on specific blog posts, you can target people on specific pages. And I find the coolest aspect of it is you can retarget people that have been on your website previously. So you can be like, hey, I saw you already on our website. Do you want to, like, it seems like you might be interested in what we have to offer. Do you want to book a call with us? Just something along those lines. So there's a ton of marketing tools that you can use, where podcast is like that one medium that feeds into all these different tools that you can use to really go after and retarget people and just market to them.
What was the name of that? You said opt-in monster?
Yep, Opt-in Monster.
Opt-in monster. Okay, so if somebody comes to your website or they've read one of your articles online, it's pulling their pixel, and
Mhm.
taking that and plugging it back into Facebook or YouTube or whatever medium they're using, and putting your ad back in front of them essentially.
Yep, exactly. So just retargeting them, because I know, like, yeah, they'll come to our website, but maybe they don't book a call the first time. But maybe, I don't want to be annoying, but like, I mean, it's like if you go to buy shoes, it's gonna follow you on the internet, and obviously
Yeah.
that works. So why not do it for my business as well if it seems to be working for these other companies?
Yeah. So what we do, I heard you say three things right there. Number one, make sure you're going on the right show. Number two, make sure you've got some kind of value add thing to
Mhm.
capture their email address or phone number so that you can continuously follow up with them. And number three, make sure you've got those automations built. The reason that's important and has worked for us specifically is a lot of times when they first engage with you, they're not ready to make a decision to give you money or make a book a call with you, but later
Mhm.
on they are. So you've got to figure out how to stay top of mind. This is where your weekly emails to them come into
Mhm.
play, your automations from your drip campaign to try to get them to book a call, your social media posts. So all this plays into the bigger picture of staying top of mind and staying relevant. And that's what's worked really well for us. I want to get into the specifics. So what you said, number one, the biggest mistake people make is they go on the wrong show. For us, what we've done, like when my assistant goes and books me on shows, we're going on shows that have our target avatar, right? Like we
Mhm.
work with a ton of busy business owners that own their own business. They want to invest in real estate and diversify. They don't want to work forever, right? They're trading their time for money with their business, and they want to create something where they can build a legacy, make an impact, and retire. And they see real estate as a way to do that and kind of offset and start generating some passive income. But we'll go on podcasts that have that demographic, right? If that's the target audience, that's who we're going on. And we also make sure that that podcast has at least 100 reviews,
Mhm.
because in the past I've booked services with companies that, hey, here's my money, and they'll book me on podcast and they'll go do it, and then I'll hop on the show and I'll find out that the show is like 3 months old
Yeah.
and has like no audience. And the problem when I was asking these other shows, I'm like, Well, show me that this is, I think they were saying this was like a top 10% podcast or something like that in the space. I can't remember what they were advertising, but I can get on there and I can tell you for sure that it was not, it was like they did not have much viewership. I was not paying for very much viewership. I was paying for like a newer guy to get started. Now, there were some long-standing shows that were sprinkled in, but we kind of settled on this metric that if they do not have at least 100 episodes, then we're not going on the podcast, and they have to have our target avatar. And so this has been the framework that my assistant has kind of been using. Are they posting consistently? 100 episodes, have our target um, avatar. Is there anything else that you feel like should be added into that when selecting the show? Or maybe I'm wrong about the minimum 100 episodes. What are your thoughts on that?
No, that's perfect. And I would say thinking about it, if you're like a newer investor, probably those smaller shows, like you mentioned, like 3 months old, it makes sense. Like if you've never been on a podcast, then that
Yeah.
makes sense. But if you've been on
Building your
like,
voice. Yeah.
yep, exactly. But if you've been on like enough podcasts, say like even like 5 podcasts, you really start to get the gist of it and you're successful in your business. Yeah, I would definitely say at least like 100 episodes. You could probably even add in there like 50 reviews and not maybe 100 reviews, depending on how much time you have to go on these podcasts. And then there's a tool that we use called Raphonic, and like you can use that tool and you can see how many people are listening to the show. So that's another nice metric to give us some ideas just to shoot for it. So like you can target podcasts over 500 listeners, 1,000 listeners. I wouldn't say it's like 100% accurate. I'm assuming like your other tool or the top 10%. I mean, I
Yeah.
could you're not like you can go and you can look, okay, this show has been around 3 months. It has 10 episodes. They're not getting 5,000 listeners an episode unless it's like a very successful person in the real estate industry. Maybe they have, you know, a million Instagram followers or something along those lines. I find that that tool is a lot better on shows that have been out for a longer period of time. It almost like overestimates shows that are, like 3 months old, but like shows that are like 6 months or to a year. I find the information is going to be a little bit more accurate. But yeah, like you mentioned, I think that's a good sweet spot is to have that show that's 100 plus episodes. Cause I mean, also, if you're going on these shows, it's like 90% of shows don't make it past 10 episodes. So like the last thing I want to do, and it's happened to me like not recently, but like maybe once a year where I have my team, they'll go on and they'll help me get booked on a show and I'll go on and this episode never gets published. I'm like, well, that's like an hour out of my day between like me like getting my like mic set up, my webcam, my lighting
Yeah.
and then after the interview, I'm sure as you know, it's hard to just like dive right back into work. I need like 5 or 10 minutes to get back into the zone before working again. So yeah, I like that, shooting for 100 plus episodes, shooting for like a good chunk of reviews on them. Those are all good metrics to follow for anyone that's out there.
Yeah. And what you're saying or what I've learned, and if you're listening to this right now and you're a little bit confused about what we're talking about, it unless the host sends you a screenshot of how many downloads they're getting per episode, you don't know. That's the problem. Like there's no advertisement showing how many downloads per episodes people are getting. The host might tell you. So for the ones that we go on that are paid, we always ask them, all right, well, send us the downloads of the past like 10 episodes you got. Because if it's not, depending on what they're asking money wise to come on the show, it may not be worth it for us. So just a little trick right there. If you're listening, you're doing this, like you don't know for sure. Let's get into what goes into a successful podcast interview because I probably did 30 episodes before I learned this. I was like, wait a minute, you need to go in with a plan here. There are specific elements to your podcast that you need to have prepared. And if you don't, then you are not optimized. In other
Mhm.
words, you are not going to be able to make a connection with the audience, add value, and actually get them to go to your website and sign up for the thing that you're doing. Let's talk about that. The people that you're working with that are raising lots of money, what does their podcast show strategy look like when they go on?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is one, adding value, and then B, sharing stories. So you could imagine pretty much everyone in the real estate investing space, probably the good majority of them, they weren't born into real estate unless, someone in their family had been doing real estate. So for them, and it's like 99% of our clients never had any real estate background. It's typical story. It might be someone working a corporate job that just wanted to find something better and they started doing real estate on the side. And then now all of a sudden they went from having a house hack, maybe a 2 unit. Now that they went to a 4 unit, then they went to an 8 unit, and then a 20 unit, and they realized, hey, I want to keep scaling this, but I realized by me managing like 50 units on my own, I'm gonna rip my I'm gonna rip my hair out. So that's why I transitioned into a 200 unit apartment complex where now I have a property management team. I have a lot less headaches, or maybe I have the same amount of headaches, but I have a lot more income coming in for 200 units versus 50 units. So they really like to share that story. And then just to add value, like, hey, like I'm looking to invest, or let's say my state of New York, I'm looking to invest in New York, I'm looking to invest in this particular part of the state. Here's why I like investing in the state. Here's why I find it valuable. And just sharing that information and just being as valuable as you can to the audience. There's always going to be a point in time in the interview where the host is going to be like, okay, where can our audience learn more about you? And then you can go through, you can plug in your company, you can plug in your, if you haven't like an ebook like I was talking about earlier, there's always going to be a point in time. But I know myself, since I started relaunching my podcast a few months back, I just have guests on. It's like all they're doing is like pushing it down my throat of like an infomercial, where it's like all
Mm.
they're trying to do is sell me on their deal, sell me on why they're the best operator. Where yeah, I mean, there's tons of operators out there, and I'd rather work with the one that's friendly. That's not, where I'm talking to them. Yeah, there might be instances where the deal is actually is closing in 5 days or a couple of days, but that's like I always hear that a lot. Like, oh, this people love this deal. It's going to be filling up fast. It's almost like you're going to like a to buy a used car. And it's like, oh, like someone else is interested in this car. It's going to sell today if you don't buy it today. That type of thing. So people don't want to hear that on the podcast interviews. So they really like to hear those stories, and they like to share as much value as possible. Like even when I'm going on podcasts, I'm happy to tell you like our exact strategy, like everything that we do. Because I mean, at the end of the day, whether you want to work with us or not, I'm just here and I just want to provide as much value as I can. If you want to work with us, obviously that's great. If you want to go do it on your own, that's perfectly fine as well. But I just want to provide as much value as I can. And I find the folks that don't do a good job are, this come off as egotistical to a certain degree and, almost like know-it-alls. And I think that people just see through that when you're talking about certain things. Like, let's say you're promising, you've never had a failure in real estate, or you just got into it a year or two ago, just different things like that, where it's like, okay, like, yeah, I mean, anyone really could have made money in real estate back in 2020, 2021, and gone full cycle in 18 months or 12 months and got a 3 or 4x equity multiple. But what are you doing now? And similar, like, what are you like when if you're talking about returns as an example, like Brandon, like you're doing like more ground up development projects with these houses and these townhomes where I'd expect a little bit higher of an IRR, just knowing that it's gonna be a little bit more risky versus like your standard value add multifamily deal. So if you're coming on and you're talking about like you're the best, you're gonna get like a 40% IRR, and it's like you're just converting it from like a B to maybe like a lower class A property. The risk isn't there for the IRR to get a 40% return. I know I'm going to be taking on a lot more risk to get a 40% IRR. So I think just like overinflating what they've done in the past and their ego and different things like that. I think
Talking about
audiences,
themselves, basically,
yeah, yep, exactly. I think that's people can just
instead
see
of
through
adding
that.
value.
Yep, exactly. And I know enough passive investors now, and being a part of a passive investor community, you know, what if someone starts to hear about you, they'll put you and they'll talk about you, and they'll be, they just won't invest with you. I mean, we're a small community of passive investors, and I know enough people where if I'm going to invest with a sponsor, I'll go and I'll reach out to someone like, hey, have you ever invested with this guy? And then go to my next friend that I have that's passive investing, and they're like, oh yeah, I listened to his podcast and he just came off like not great. I'm like, okay, well, there's enough sponsors out there where I'm not going to invest with them, and that's going to be, the end of it at the end of the day.
Yeah. Don't go on the show and talk about yourself. Add
Mhm,
value. So, well, like for what's worked really well for us is being really good at telling your story and having some
mhm,
kind of emotional connection. Usually, there needs to be some kind of last straw moment where oh, at this point happened, it changed everything, and now I'm on this mission to help so and so. Then, like you said, add value. And I think I learned this too late too, is you're also entertaining. So you're edutaining.
mhm,
This is a show. People don't just want education anymore. You've got to entertain them too, right? We live in the Netflix world and the Amazon world where they want stuff instantaneously. There's got to be a little bit of an experience with it. So figuring out how to edutain, applying that entertainment, that's worked
mhm,
out really well. And then at the end, having some kind of call to action where you speak to their hearts. So rather than say, hey, my name's Brandon. If you want to invest passively in real estate, go to our website. Bingo. Right. Versus speaking to their hearts. Like, hey, if you're a busy business owner, if you're trying to build a legacy, if you're trying to make an impact, if your ultimate goal is to retire, then go to our website, hbgcapital.net or whatever it is. Like, learn to speak to their hearts when you're doing that, because everything you said makes total sense. You're trying to make a connection with people over here, right? You're
Mhm.
trying to elicit an emotional reaction that is going to cause them to go and click and book a call with you, or click and get your ebook. So you've got to figure out how to create those emotional reactions. Am I off point here?
No, that's perfect. And I would add something in there where if you're like wondering how do I go about this, so definitely you can go out there and practice on these podcasts. I found that worked for me was twofold. It helped out that I was in college when I started my podcast. And I was actually in college when I had started my business, but I took a public speaking course. So that
Mhm.
was very good. I mean, I remember one presentation in the speaking course where you had to do a demonstration. So at that time I was really into yoga. So I had to walk the class through like a 10-minute yoga session of me going up there and going through the whole motion. So I mean, once you do that, it becomes a lot easier to talk
Yeah.
about anything with anyone. And then even to push myself a little further, just went and joined Toastmasters. For those listening who might not know what Toastmasters is, it's basically like a public speaking opportunity. So there's a
Yeah.
bunch of it's usually corporate professionals that would just want to get better at public speaking because that's probably the number one fear of a lot of people is going out
Mhm.
there in public speaking. And I found out just by doing that for over the course of a couple months, I just got a lot better at speaking, at telling stories. So there's different areas where you could do if you're think, oh, I'm not ready to go on podcasts, then go join like a Toastmasters club where you can do public speaking. I mean, there's so many chapters all over the country. I would imagine there's
Yeah.
one near everyone that's listening. So I would recommend that as well. If you're like, hey, I'm a little hesitant, I don't know how to go. I'm fearful of going on podcasts and making a fool of myself, well, just go do a public speaking course because it might benefit you.
Yeah, that and starting your own podcast. Do 30,
Mhm.
40 episodes of you talking to yourself and watching and going back and listening and making the tweaks. That works out really too. If you do it enough times, you end up finding your voice. I love it. So let's jump in here because we got a few minutes left. You're a limited partner. You invest passively in real estate. What are some of the red flags that you look for, and the green flags too? Let's go over that when you're looking at investing in some other person's real estate deals.
Yeah, most certainly. So I'll start off on the red flags because I feel like when I was first investing, I probably talked to 25 different sponsors just to get a different idea of different folks because it was almost like everyone I talked to, they would tell me they've underwritten conservatively, that they have the next best deal. And when you talk to 25 people and they actually say that or something similar to that, I'm like, okay, what's a good deal? What's not going to be a good deal? So over the course of time, here are a couple of red flags. One, showing up on time for the call. I had like an individual where they showed up 10 minutes late to the call last month. I really liked his company. I liked his offering. And the IR person, investor relations person, showed up 10 minutes late. And it's like, okay, well, now you've wasted 10 minutes of my time. I've even had folks where I had a call booked at 10 a.m. and they call me at like 10:33 a.m. And it's like, hey, sorry, I got caught up. It's like, okay, well, if I'm going to invest 50K with you and you can't even show up on time for the call. So that's like, that's one red flag. That's just very easy. That's just simple, just showing up on time for the call. I don't want to, my time is valuable. I don't want to waste it talking. I don't, not that I want to waste it talking to you, but I don't want to waste it just sitting there, not being able to do anything, waiting for you to hop on Zoom or to give a call on my cell phone. I know we touched on it a little bit, but taking a look at returns and seeing like what they're promising. Have they gone full cycle? Can they actually prove that they've done these deals? Even if they haven't gone full cycle, like I invested in this triple net lease deal and they're a fairly new company about a year or two into it, but they were very helpful for me when I would ask them questions. It made sense. Their numbers made sense. I mean, it was a pretty simple deal. It was corporate grade A tenants. So the tenants were like AutoZone, Family Dollar, Dollar General. So there wasn't a ton of risk there, but their promised returns were 7 to 10%. So I was like, that makes sense. Where if they promised me like 25% returns, like that doesn't make sense because it's a very low risk asset. There's not a ton of risk in it. I know there's been like deals where there's an oil and gas deal I was looking at, and it was like 200% carbon depreciation or capture. So yeah, exactly. So I didn't know what that meant. I was like, that sounds too good to be true. And it actually turned it out to be a Ponzi scheme. So I was like, if it sounds too good to be true, yeah, I feel
How did you
bad.
find out it was a Ponzi scheme?
So I'm a part of a community called Left Field Investors. So and a few of the folks from the community had invested in it. and I felt bad. So I had actually met up with a couple of group members in Boston and we were talking about it. And I was like, that just seems way too good to be true. Like I invested 100K into the deal and I can write off 200K. I was like, I don't know. That seems off. And of course, so that's another one. Like, how are you promising your returns? I'd rather you promise me a 12% IRR and I get a 15% IRR where you actually are underwriting conservatively and then also taking a look at their underwriting where or what you're presenting actual factual, numbers. Like if you're expecting like 5%, growth rate if you're a multifamily investor, what's the surrounding units or the surrounding apartment complexes actually getting? If you're 50% occupied, you expect to be 95% occupied within 5 months, 4 months. That just seems like a very quick turnaround time for me when you're turning over all the units. So just different things like that. Like how are you presenting the deal? Outside of that, it's like communication style. If I ask you a question, which I do for every single sponsor I invest with, how quickly do you get back to me? Is it 3 days? Is it 5 days? Which is perfectly fine with me. But if you get back to me like 2 weeks later, or I ask you a question, you don't even get back to me, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna move on to the next sponsor. I'm trying to think what else. The other part would be hopping on a call and do you even ask like what I'm looking for? Because this has happened to me where I'm talking to the sponsor and they just go over everything about their company, where they're investing, without even asking me like, is this even what I want to be doing right now? Like, am I investing for cash flow? Am I investing more for an equity play? What am I looking to invest? Do I have the capital right now? Am I investing through a cash account or self-directed IRA? Just things like that where they don't even really get to know me. They're just like selling me on their entire company. I'm just like sitting there for like 20 minutes, like, okay, I just want to hop off this call. Like, yeah, your company sounds great, but like it's actually not a fit for what I'm looking for in this moment. But I didn't have the chance to tell you that because you didn't even ask me. So just different things like that I think are really red flags. And then when it comes to the green flags, the deals like I've invested with, their returns seem good. They didn't seem overly aggressive. The numbers made sense for the market. They actually did. If they said they underwrote conservatively, they actually did do that. They had potentially either gone full cycle on a deal or they're just very good at communicating. Like that triple net lease individuals, again, they'd only been doing it a year or two, but she was so good at getting back to me and communicating. It was like every question I had. I mean, this was like I started talking to her about 4 months before I invested with her. And to give you some context, I was asking her like, "Hey, what's the difference between a 506C deal and a 506B deal?" Because I still had no idea. So like that's how granular the questions was, and she would always get back to me and would never like oh my god, maybe she was like oh my god, this guy's so annoying asking these questions, but she would always get back to me in a timely manner. So those are some of the things that I look for in a sponsor. And again, how pushy are they? I mean, for me, like I never want to be sold to. So if I feel like I'm being sold to, if I feel like you're really pushing this deal down my throat, I'm like, I'm just gonna go find another sponsor. So I think it's really a mixture of those between the green flags and the red flags that I see in these sponsors. But yeah, probably number one thing is just making sure you show up to your call on time, making sure that your numbers make sense for what you're doing, and then make sure that you communicate correctly as well. And then actually one more thing I want to add is on every sponsor that I invest with, I'll do a background check on them, and I'll say, hey, I'm doing a background check. Anything I should be aware of? And sometimes I might be like, oh, I had a tax lien on this property because I was going through a divorce and the property got caught up in the divorce. So something like that. Okay, that makes sense. And then you have the guy that had a bankruptcy like 5 years ago and doesn't mention that to me. I'm like, well, that's a pretty big life event. That's not like, oh, I accidentally ran a stop sign or a red light 5 years ago and I got a ticket. There's actually one guy, he got like 15 speeding tickets. And I was like, I don't know if I should invest with him. I mean, like, maybe a couple, but like 15 in like a 10-year period, that just seems like I
Like
don't
he's
think I
kind
ever
of too
invest.
risk averse or something. Yeah, I see where you're
Yeah.
going with that.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's the extra last one. It's just be truthful. Like I'd rather you tell me, hey, I went through a bankruptcy, but I've changed my game plan. Here's what I'm doing different now. Where everyone, people in '08, they invested in deals that were super smart and successful, and the market just it didn't work out. They had to file bankruptcy, but now they've come back along and they've
Yeah.
done a great job. So I'd rather you explain to me like, hey, this is what happened. Here's what I'm doing to prevent it in the future. Okay, that sounds good. Maybe I'll invest in your deal. So just a couple of those things that I find between the green and red flags with sponsors.
We tell people, so like we've got an ebook called 100 Questions Business Owners Ask for Investing, and that's one of the things we tell people to background check. I'm so
Mhm.
glad that I've met somebody who actually does that because nobody does that
Yeah.
anymore at all. And like I advise it, and we've got a lot of investors, and none of them ask me for my information to do a background check. And I'm like, y'all, literally, everybody needs to have a
Mhm.
background check. If you're giving them hundreds of thousands of dollars, before I got into uh, business with my partners, I did background checks on them. I wanted to
Yeah.
know what was going on before. And one guy had like top secret military clearance. I was like, I don't think I'm having problems here. So that was kind of funny. But 100%, these are all really great points that you bring up. Trevor, if people want to get in touch with you, learn more about learn more about using the podcast medium to raise capital for real estate or just for their business in general, where should they go?
Yeah, most certainly. So they can go check out our website, podcastingu.com. You can go there and you'll get a free ebook, and it'll basically be walk you through everything you need to know about being a successful podcast guest, how to get yourself on podcasts. And then outside of that, if you just want to connect with me, always happy to have a conversation. The best spot will probably be LinkedIn, and you could just connect with me there under my name, Trevor Oldham. Assuming if you search it up, I'll probably come up there, and happy to connect there and start a conversation with anyone that wants to, whether just talking to passive investors that are just want some advice, or whether it's folks that do want to go out there and get themselves booked on podcasts.
Dude, I'm looking at your website right now. It's very, very chic, very slick, and you've been on some really big name brands. There's some case studies too on the website. So y'all go and check this out. Trevor, it has been an absolute pleasure. We're going to make sure all those links get posted in the show notes. Thanks for hopping on today.
Thank you.